The moment a narcissist realizes you no longer care, what collapses inside them is not love, it is control. And that is when everything begins to turn dangerous in a very different way. Most people assume that once they stop arguing, stop explaining, stop trying to be understood, the toxic bond finally begins to lose its power. But to a narcissist, your silence is never just silence. It is a cut in their supply. As long as you are still hurt by them, still angry because of them, still confused by them, they are still alive inside your inner world. They are still the center of some emotional movement. But the moment you become calm, the moment you stop chasing answers, stop trying to win meaningless arguments, stop needing them to confirm anything about your worth, they feel the one thing they fear most: they are losing their place. That is why a narcissist does not panic most when you leave physically. They panic most when you leave emotionally, when your eyes stop scanning them, when your silence is no longer the silence of someone wounded, but the silence of someone who has finally seen enough. And in that exact moment, their ego begins to crack in a way they will never openly admit, because a narcissist does not live on real love. They live on impact, on your reaction, on your orbit around them, whether through hope, pain, or anger. So when you stop giving them that, they do not only feel abandoned, they feel themselves beginning to disappear. And what does a person do when they cannot bear the feeling of disappearing and realize they can no longer reach you the old way? They do not let go. They try everything to make you feel again. And that is exactly where their real face starts, becoming impossible to hide. The first thing that happens when a narcissist realizes you no longer care is not sadness. It is not regret. It is a panic that feels much closer to hunger. Because throughout the relationship, they were never truly living on your presence as an independent human being. They were living on your reactions, on your eyes still turning back toward them, on the nights you lost sleep because of something they said, on the way you pulled your own memory apart trying to decide who was right and who was wrong, on your sadness, your anger, your hope, and even your disappointment. To you, all of that was pain. To them, it was proof that they still had power. So when you stop reacting, they do not experience it as ordinary distance. They experience it as a cut in supply. Something that used to flow toward them suddenly stops. No more long messages trying to explain. No more repeated questions. No more returning to the conversation just to make sure you had not been misunderstood. No more slight tremor in your voice when they pressed on the place that used to hurt most. And that quieting is what disorients them far more than most people realize. Empaths often assume that if they go silent, the other person will not notice. But a narcissist notices that shift very quickly. They have an almost instinctive sensitivity to power. They may not read emotional depth the way an empath does, but they are highly skilled at detecting when the old leverage no longer works. They hear the difference in a shorter answer. They see the absence of panic in your eyes. They sense that this time you are no longer standing inside the dynamic with the same heart as before. And that is exactly when panic starts rising behind the composed mask. This panic is not the panic of someone afraid of losing love. It is closer to the panic of someone slipping out of the central position they assumed would always be theirs. A narcissist does not need you to love them in any mature sense in order to feel attached. They only need you to remain affected by them. As long as your breathing changes because of them, they feel large inside your world. So when you stop orbiting them emotionally, an unspoken question begins forming inside them. Who am I in this person's life? If I can no longer shake them, that is why the early stage of your detachment is often not loud. but intensely charged. You may not have gone no contact. You may not have fully left. You may not have declared anything dramatic. But the room begins to feel heavier. Questions that sound casual carry the scent of inspection. You've been quiet lately. What are you thinking about? Is something wrong? You've changed. It sounds like concern, but beneath it is sharp surveillance. They do not really want to understand you. They want to test whether the old door is still open, whether there is still some place in you soft enough for them to touch and trigger. When they cannot find the familiar response, they begin trying the old keys again. A half-joking, half-cutting remark, a boundary you just set, touched as though by accident, a small promise casually forgotten, a brief withdrawal placed exactly where it used to make you anxious. They are casting hooks into the water to see whether there is still any movement answering them. And what frustrates them most is when the water remains still, not because you no longer have a heart, but because for the first time, that heart is no longer granting them unconditional access. Many empaths at this stage begin doubting themselves. They feel the air becoming heavier, feel the other person watching them differently. Notice the small frictions increasing and begin asking, am I becoming too cold? Am I becoming unfeeling? Should I explain myself so this tension goes away? This is the crucial point. A narcissist does not need you to love them again immediately. They only need you to reopen the channel of reaction. The moment you begin self-explaining, self-monitoring, or wondering whether you are being unfair, they already have a pathway back into your mind. Because for them, control is not always making you obey. Sometimes control is simply making you think about them enough, making you carry them in your head, replaying each detail, each glance, each sentence. As long as you are still decoding them, they are still alive inside you. And as long as they remain an active inner movement, they have not lost. That is why genuine indifference destabilizes them so deeply. Not because it is cruel, but because it is clean. Anger is still a bond. Hood is still a bond. Even hatred is still a bond. Only calm detachment gives them nothing to hold. And a person who has long been used to seeing themselves reflected vividly inside your emotions will experience that calmness like erasure. They start to feel unsure of what role they still play in your story. That is the feeling they cannot tolerate. And from that intolerable place, they shift from testing to tightening. Not necessarily through one major explosion at first, but through a more calculated, sharper, more precise sequence of moves, aimed exactly at the places in you that are still soft. They cannot accept becoming background noise inside your world. They will do everything they can to force themselves back into the foreground, whether through fake tenderness, anger, coldness, or victimhood. And that is when the real shape of the game becomes harder to hide. They are not panicking because they lost you. They are panicking because, for the first time, you are no longer allowing them to define your emotional reality. When the old hooks no longer pull you back, a narcissist rarely stops at testing. They begin shifting into two extremes. Empaths often know very well, but while still entangled, may fail to recognize for what they are eruption or freeze. At one moment, they can become so explosive, it feels as though the whole room is being torn open. At another, they go cold so quickly that their silence feels like a wall of ice suddenly rising in front of you. These two extremes look different, but they serve the same purpose: to drag you back into the old state where your emotions still move under their hand. Narcissistic rage at this stage is not ordinary anger. It is not born from the healthy grief of someone losing something precious. It comes from a fracture in the ego, The moment they sense that you are no longer revolving around them, a deep humiliation begins to surface. Not humiliation for hurting you. Humiliation because they can no longer provoke you the way they used to. Humiliation because words that once kept you awake now land against stone. Humiliation because they are looking at a version of you that no longer needs them to define what is real. And for someone who lives off the impact they create in others, that is an unbearable blow to the self, because they cannot tolerate that feeling. They throw it outward, into you. You begin hearing words sharper than usual, attacks no longer wearing the old, half-joking disguise, but going directly into soft places. They may criticize what once made you insecure. They may resurrect old mistakes as proof that you are ungrateful, cold, or fake. They may suddenly change tone, expression, entire presence, until you look at them and feel as though the gentle version you once knew never truly existed. The goal of these blows is not only to hurt you, more deeply. They are trying to create an emotional shock strong enough to make you flare back up. A tear, a defense, a collapse. Anything that proves they can still get inside you. Some empaths look at this rage and think maybe this is their real pain finally showing. But most of the time, that pain is not opening in the direction of maturity. It is opening in the direction of punishment. They are not saying, I am losing you and I am hurting. They are acting as though, if I cannot keep you, I will make this separation cost you. That is why so much rage in this phase feels so cold, even while it looks hot. It is targeted, retributive, designed to spoil the peace you have just begun touching. Because they cannot tolerate the idea that you are developing an emotional life that no longer asks their permission, but when rage fails to pull you back, another extreme appears, frozen silence. This is what empaths often mistake for peace more easily. Because it is not loud, there are no sharp scenes, no obvious display that others can easily witness. It is just withdrawal, absence, no answer, presence that feels like non-presence. But this silence does not resemble the mature stepping back of someone needing space to reflect. It is intentional, punitive, designed to suspend you in uncertainty until you begin asking yourself, what did I do wrong? Did I go too far? Was I too cold? Did I become the hurtful one? This is exactly where many empaths get pulled backward. Not to be love, but by anxiety. They cannot bear the wordless void. They feel the urge to send one message to clarify things, to explain that they never meant to wound, to soften the atmosphere, so it will stop feeling so heavy. And the moment they move closer in that way, the narcissist knows the silent treatment is still working. Because what they needed was never a healthy relationship. What they needed was proof that they still have enough power to destabilize you. The cruelty of these two extremes lies in the way they often work together. Rage comes to shock you. Silence comes to empty you out. One makes you hurt sharply. The other makes you question yourself. One floods the nervous system with alarm. The other wears you down in waiting. And when the empath has not yet recognized the structure beneath the pattern, they imagine they are looking at two different faces of the same pain. In truth, they are looking at the same defense mechanism, changing tactics. A mechanism that says, if I cannot pull you through fire, I will pull you through ice. If I cannot get your energy through explosion, I will take it through waiting, through making you destabilize yourself in search of some meaning in my absence. A narcissist does not need you to return in love in order to feel they have won. Very often, it is enough that you are stuck wondering what they are thinking, debating whether to reach out first, analyzing a silence that went on longer than usual. The moment your mind is forced to orbit their movements again, They have already reclaimed part of the old position, because as long as your inner life is revolving around their shifts, you have not fully stepped out. And they know that at this stage, empaths often feel pulled between two exhausting poles. On one side, they have touched a deeper clarity in themselves. They know they cannot keep living the old way. They know they no longer want to explain, chase, and repair like before. But on the other side, the attacks and the freezing silences hit exactly where they are still tender. The fear of being misunderstood, the fear of hurting someone, the fear of being abandoned in coldness without any closure. And because empaths still carry so much humanity, they often turn inward to question their own ethics, instead of recognizing that they are witnessing a power test. That is why real detachment requires more than simply not texting or not arguing. It asks the empath to see through both the rage and the silence, and recognize what is moving underneath them. Not injured love, not pain-seeking understanding, but the desperation of an ego losing access to your inner world. Once they see that clearly, the empath stops treating the rage as though it carries sacred truth, and stops fearing the silence as though it says anything real about their worth. They begin to understand that both fire and ice are only two different ways of dragging them back onto the old stage. And when neither rage nor silence can move you anymore, the narcissist is forced to pivot toward another form of manipulation, one more subtle, sweeter, and more dangerous than the last. No longer forcing you through fear, no longer freezing you through anxiety, but returning through something that looks like remorse, awakening, even genuine collapse. And that is exactly where the hardest door of all begins to open for the empath. And then, when neither fire nor ice can pull you back anymore, the narcissist often turns to the one thing an empath finds hardest to resist: well-timed softness. No more obvious rage. No more freezing silence, sharp enough to numb the room. Instead, the voice softens. A few sentences sound reflective. A few tender memories are brought back at exactly the right moment. A few apologies land just deeply enough to make your heart loosen. This is the stage where many people believe they are finally seeing the other person's true self. But very often, what appears here is not maturity. It is simply survival instinct changing tactics. Empaths are especially vulnerable here because they are not only leaving a person, they are leaving a dream. The dream that beneath all the chaos there really was someone authentic enough, hurt enough, human enough to heal. So when the narcissist returns looking as though they finally understand, the empath does not hear it with reason alone. They hear it through every surviving thread of hope inside them. A sentence like, "I know I hurt you," or "I've been thinking a lot," or "You're the only one who ever really understood me." Those words do not have to be perfect. They only have to touch the part of you that still wants to believe that everything you gave was not completely wasted. That is why this move is more dangerous than rage. Rage, at least, activates defense. Softness goes straight into the empath's rescue instinct. It makes you wonder whether you are becoming too hard, whether walking away now would mean abandoning someone who is genuinely falling apart, whether this might finally be the breakthrough you waited for all along. And the moment those questions arise, the inner door has already begun to open. But there is something the empath must see with absolute clarity here. Real remorse and panic over losing control can look almost identical on the surface. Both can cry. Both can appear vulnerable. Both can say things that sound awakened. But one leads a person into responsibility. The other only leads them back toward access. Someone who is truly changing does not use their pain to make you feel obligated to stay. They do not turn their breakdown into a moral burden placed on your chest. They do not present their despair as proof that you must open the door one more time. The narcissist at this stage often does the exact opposite. They place their emotional collapse into your hands like a test. If you leave, you are heartless. If you do not save me, then you have changed. If you were still the person you used to be, you would not leave me alone like this. This is where manipulation becomes most refined, because it is no longer speaking in the voice of power. It speaks in the voice of pain. It does not demand directly. It generates guilt. It makes your departure feel less like self-protection and more like a betrayal of your own goodness. And for the empath, that cuts deep, because they can survive attack. They can survive being misunderstood, but it is very hard for them to survive feeling like they are becoming cold in the face of someone else's suffering. So many people return not because they still love in the old way. They return because they cannot yet bear the image of themselves as the one who walked away while someone was crying. They return because they want relief from guilt, because they want to close the unfinished scene in a more decent way, because they want to believe that if they stay just a little longer, perhaps this time things will not fall back into the old darkness. But this is precisely where the cycle often reconnects with even more force than before. Because once the narcissist learns that tears and collapse open you faster than rage ever did, they remember that path very well. And if the softness still does not work, they can pivot quickly into other kinds of pulling. One moment they speak of the future as though everything could still be repaired. Another moment they revive beautiful memories, making you question your painful ones. Another moment they tell other people how hard they tried while you became cold. Another moment they appear with someone new, not because the pain is gone, but because they need another mirror to reflect that they are still desirable, still chosen. Watching these movements can leave the empath disoriented, because it all seems to happen without any stable logic. One moment they are shattered. The next, they behave as though they never hurt at all. One moment they pull for closeness. The next, they perform, moving on, but underneath it all, the axis remains the same. They cannot bear becoming emotionally irrelevant inside your world. This is also where the empath must understand that true indifference is not hatred, and it is not performative strength. It is the state in which you are no longer feeding the game with your energy. You do not need to win with words. You do not need to prove that you are more aware, more correct, more dignified. Every time you explain one last time, seek understanding one last time, to try to make them finally see one last time, you pour more fuel into the exact machine that has been draining you. Only when you stop providing that fuel does the stage begin to darken for real. And for the narcissist, that is a quiet but devastating collapse. Because when you no longer hurt in a way they can read, no longer rage in a way they can touch, no longer soften in a way they can predict, they are forced to face the starkest truth of all. Perhaps they never really had you. They only had your attention, your hope, your pain, and your compassion for a period of time. But your actual self, the part that finally knows how to stop, how to step back, how to refuse signing onto the same cycle again, has now moved beyond their reach. And that is the point where the fracture inside them becomes something larger. They may go find another source, another stage, another person to cast in the same old roles, but the place that saw them clearly and then cease to care, that place becomes a crack in the ego they will struggle to forget. Not because of deep love, but because, perhaps for the first time, the game simply stopped working. In the end, what unsettles the narcissist most was never your leaving. What shakes them far more is the moment they realize they can no longer live inside you, no longer keep you awake at night, no longer pull you back into the old loops, no longer make you tear yourself apart searching for meaning inside their every shift of mood. And that is where the truth becomes unmistakable. What they fear, losing, is not love, but influence. Because once you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop letting your emotions become the ground they stand on, the entire structure that once made them feel powerful begins to hollow out. Their rage, their silence, their tears, their new performances, all of it circles around one central panic. You have seen the game. And this time, you are no longer playing. For the empath, this is where real maturity begins. Not when you defeat them, not when they apologize, not when the world finally understands what you went through, but when you no longer need any of that in order to keep moving. When you understand that it is not your task to hold another person's ego together, not your task to keep pouring out emotion in exchange for something that was never truly love, not your task to remain inside a place that slowly erodes you simply because the best part of you still wants to rescue. And from that moment on, power changes hands. It no longer belongs to the person who manipulates better. It returns to the one who finally stops betraying their own peace. You do not walk away as the winner of a war. You walk away as someone who has stopped feeding a machine. And perhaps that is what the narcissist can never bear most of all, not that you hate them, but that they no longer get to decide anything inside you.